Okay, hey guys, how's it going? It's me, Josh Holzer, owner and founder of the BioDude. Today, I am with Mariah of Reptiles, and we're gonna answer some questions that we get asked all the time. So this is our first tips video from Mariah and myself. So what's the first question?
All right, these are enclosure questions.
All
How do you
right.
keep your terrarium glass so clean?
Oh, it's time consuming. So there are a lot of options out there. Mariah, what do you use at home?
So for really bad, if I'm being lazy and the mineral deposits really start to build up, I'll go at it with just a razor blade and very carefully scrape the deposits off. When I'm better about it, I'll actually just use straight lemon juice and a sponge, and I'll just use the acidity to get off. What I like about using lemon juice rather than white vinegar is that it isn't as pungent smelling. So it's going to be a little bit more pleasant for me, and it's not going to be as fumey for the animals either.
Yeah, that's really nice. So I use a 40% apple cider vinegar mixture with water, and then we spray the front, take a razor blade to it, wipe it down. The smell is usually there for a couple minutes, but we do that about 3 times a week because our misters are constantly going off. We use really high quality water, so we don't have a lot of mineral deposits stuff on there, but our critters are so active that I like to make sure that my glass is clean, and they always either leave something on the glass for me, whether it's food or poo or what have you. Yeah.
Doing poo painting.
Yep.
The enclosures that you create look very cluttered, and I'm worried the animals don't have any room to move around. I feel like I'll never see my animal.
I hear that from my husband a lot. Are you sure we're going to be able to see the animal after it's moved in? And the big thing to remember here with enclosure design is that, yes, there are lots of places and opportunities for the animal to hide. More importantly, however, reptiles are generally animals that like to hide. They need to have plenty of places to be out of sight where they feel like they're not going to get eaten. When you provide those places for them, they feel more comfortable being out in the open. So, I mean, yeah, you are going to see it less often than if you were keeping it in a bare box. But because they can be out in the open safely, you're actually probably going to see them more.
Yeah.
And as for usable space,
Nature's crowded.
Nature can be kind of crowded sometimes, and you're giving them as much enrichment as possible.
Yep.
And again, it's about creating those hiding places. Know the type of animal, though, and the amount of space that it needs to move around, and design your enclosure accordingly.
Yep. So, for example, we know that Uromastyx love to bask, but they also, you know, really have a good time of a big amount of space to move around and climb on their rocks. So when you build your enclosure, you want to make sure that you have, you know, cluttered groups of rocks, for example, for them to be able to climb up and bask on. Same thing for pancake tortoise. You know, where they're from, it is crowded, and there is rocks and there are things everywhere. So just remembering that they're wild animals at the end of the day, and it's your job to mimic their natural habitat as closely as possible. Ain't that right?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm a little distracted by someone who found something that spooked him, and so he's going off like a freaking phone. He's vibrating all over the place. Okay, we cool, bud? Here we go.
What are easy ways I can bring my animal enrichment in their enclosure without spending a lot of money?
Oh, can I start with this one?
Go for it.
So one thing that I like to do, especially for my bearded dragon, my buddy does this with his Uromastyx, and honestly, any herbivore, omnivore, is you can go to any large grocery chain store, such as Kroger, Giant, really whatever's around you, and you can buy organically grown mint, hibiscus, oregano, and rosemary. Hibiscus is really only here in Texas that I found, but a lot of those other things, you can buy them for about $2.99 a plant. You can put them in your enclosure, and then the plant may survive if you water it every day, but at the end of the day, what you get is a plant that's in the enclosure that your beardy or your herbivore / omnivore can eat and graze as nature intended. Another really good thing are seeds. So for tortoises, growing your own flats of grass seeds that you can grow the special types of grasses that they need for young sulcata tortoises and other grassland grazers. That's easily done in your home. You pull the flat of grass out, put it in their enclosure, and they can go ham on the fresh grass that was just grown for them. But when it comes to other means of enrichment, there's a lot of other ways that I know that Mariah has a lot of experience with as well.
When it comes to budget-friendly enrichment options, so my first thought is enrichment activities. Zoos are great for inspiration here because usually they have a tighter budget and they have a lot of enrichment requirements that they need to be meeting for their animals. So actually, random things around the house can work great as long as they're easy to clean afterward, or, you know, they're just trash. So kind of like you give a cat your Amazon box, if you get smaller ones, they're good for the reptiles too. Putting a prey item in a box for snakes is actually a great intro to a puzzle feeder. If you're not familiar with puzzle feeders for snakes, Lori Torini's videos are fantastic for getting started there. Crumpled up newspaper, clean leaf litter of different types brings a sensory enrichment. A cotton ball drenched with like a drop of perfume, something really small if you have a really scent-oriented animal, or better yet, use a food extract. Something that doesn't smell like food to them, but might smell like food to you. So vanilla, for example, is a good one. Let's see, other budget-friendly enrichment activities. I like to do a box of stuff, so I have a storage tub full of just random things that I use to build enclosures. And so sometimes I'll stick a snake in there to just, you know, wiggle around while I watch, and it can smell the things, it can experience the textures. For fossorial species, giving them new things to burrow in can actually be fun. So different types of substrates. Again, leaf litter is fantastic, and Biodude leaf litter is some of the most affordable that I've found, which is really awesome.
We try.
Let's see. And in terms of environmental enrichment inside the enclosure, yeah, I feel it can be really pricey. So finding, if you live in an area where you can harvest pieces of wood that are clean, that you can save a lot of money on branches that way. Yep. And plants, there's not so much you
plants
can do
are tough.
with plants. A good quality plant is going to cost you. You can save money by buying a small one and then growing it into a bigger plant. But of course, time is money, money is time. You make the decision there.
Yep. And you know, there are other options that you can get. Essentially, they make them for ferrets. There are these plastic balls that have slits in them that are about as thick as my pinky and whole. And what you do is you put treats inside the ball, and then the ferrets have to put their little nosies and their little fingers in those holes to get out the food. Now, depending on the type of live prey item in there, whether it's like a larger roach or whatever, you might be able to, you know, take those balls and put some prey items in there, and you can actually hang them in enclosures for really intelligent animals like green tree monitors. I've actually seen a lot of people give, like, not mystery pieces, but the monitors have to go through almost a two-step progression just to get to the feeder insect that's inside the containment unit. And when you have an extremely intelligent reptile like that, that's the whole point of keeping them. So it's good. It's a good thing to do, to recognize that your reptile is a lot more smarter than what you think it is, and then attempting to reinforce that with different types of stimuli to make them, you know, get enrichment. You know,
even for the quote-unquote dumb species, they benefit much more from enrichment than most people think.
Yep, absolutely. And honestly, enrichment can be as simple as it's enrichment. It comes with extra.
It doesn't need to be complicated. One of the things I like to do for the animals that tolerate it well, rearrange the enclosure. Yep. For ones that are kind of new to that routine, just move one or two items. Shake it up a little bit. Even more advanced options, move the basking spot. Yep. As long as you can do so without really wrecking your temperature gradient. Yep. Or give the entire thing an overhaul every month or so. I know my blue-tongued skinks would actually probably really benefit from frequent overhauls because they're that active and curious.
Yeah. Is there an intelligent lizard? Okay. Oh, that was a great question.
Substrates and drainage layers. How do you calculate how much substrate you will need for your vivarium?
Do you have a good formula for this?
It's not really I guess it's indicative of your animal. It's different for like everything. Like for a grandis enclosure, I'll put like, because they don't like, you know, I'll put like 2 bags of fauna in there because they're not going to go down there. But if it's like a crested gecko, cresties go on the ground. They lay on the ground in the leaf litter. I'll go 3 bags in case they freaking burrow, which I've actually seen them do that before. I've actually seen them go into the initial layer of the leaf litter and go almost an inch down. So it's like, it's kind of indicative. I guess I could go like a minimum, like, you know, so for like, for me, for Bldg substrate, I can tell you all night and day, but for like other people's like sizing, I don't know.
When figuring out how much substrate to recommend people to use when I'm creating a care guide, for example, how many bags of substrate do they buy? Okay, so what I usually do is I calculate volume. So I will take the length multiplied by the width of the enclosure to get its floor area, and that will give me an idea of, if we do it in inches, we'll get the amount of substrate we get in cubic inches to get 1 inch of substrate. So then you take that and you multiply that by the number of inches of substrate that you want. That works pretty well. It's a pretty simple mathematical formula for getting what you want. The only downside is, and then you have to convert from cubic inches into quarts.
Yeah, and that's
or
what,
square feet.
So
rather.
yeah, what I figured out is a 6-quart bag in a 10-gallon tank gives me 1.5 inches. That's how I figured out like my initial thing, because it's challenging, because there are other people that sometimes have these weird enclosures that aren't standard, like hexagonal or something like that.
Yeah,
and then
for
that's
those,
when
tough.
That's when a lot of times I just look at the length and width, and then I'll see, okay, this is what I use for a 40. This is close to the footprint of a 40. I cut back 4 quarts on each. This is what's going to work. I know
sometimes you just have to guesstimate.
And that's not very specific, guys, and I apologize about that. It's just, there's a lot of factors that come into with what it is that you want when you're picking out the amount of substrate. And you also need to look at if it's an arboreal species. Okay, is this species need a large enclosure? Yes, that means we need trees. How much substrate do trees need? A lot of it. So, you know, it's not just, I have this size enclosure, this is how much I need. There's a lot of other things that go with that. So the first thing as a keeper you need to do is look at the care requirements of your animals, how you're going to build around those care requirements to make sure you're hitting them. And then from there, you can then start figuring out, okay, for the base, this is what I need, but to hit these extra care requirements, for example, of the tree, I'm going to need X amount more because of the amount extra that I need.
Yeah, there's a big difference. That's actually one of the biggest differences with having a naturalistic enclosure versus a bioactive.
Yes, it is.
Is the amount of substrate that you're using. Naturalistic, you can get that look with only, you know, arboreal, okay, 2 inches of substrate to kind of help with humidity plus leaf litter. But when you've got bioactive, you need 8 inches or more to give those trees the kind of root space that they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Do you recommend using a pre-made background like the foam ones that come with Exoterras and ZoomEd?
So, I love what Exoterra and ZoomEd has done for our community. I love that Exoterra transcended those cages to be like no one has touched them for when it comes to manufacturing glass aquariums. But I don't ever recommend that anybody ever uses those backgrounds ever. Because they're styrofoam. And the biggest thing that I get nervous about is when you have a carnivore that eats insects. A lot of times your insects and your cleanup crew will eat at that styrofoam, and then those little bits of styrofoam go into the inside of the crickets, go into the inside of the roaches, and then when your critter goes and eats that feeder insect, they are then also ingesting beautiful micro pieces of digested styrofoam. Yeah. So I've also had issues with animals getting stuck in the back. Have you?
If you secure it well, it's not so much of an issue.
Yep.
I just prefer to use, if I'm going to use a commercial background, I'll use the flat panels of cork.
Yep.
And then I'll attach it with the silicone. And that way I don't really have to worry about it going anywhere. I don't have to worry about the animals getting behind it. What I have had issues, though, with is crickets getting behind the background.
Yes, and then they start chirping.
And then they chirp. And it's like, that's never, I actually had one very recently get into the like inner workings of the enclosure itself, tore the entire enclosure apart, still couldn't find it, had to go into like the light hood above it, and finally found it there. It was a disaster. And of course, that enclosure's in my bedroom, so.
Yep. It's like keeping dumpy frogs in your enclosure at night, or in your bedroom at night.
Yeah, there are some animals you don't keep in your bedroom.
Yeah, very loud, very loud. Okay, so you know, if you decide to use a background, you need to make sure you're doing your due diligence. You're checking that background. You're not putting too much feeder insects in there, and you make sure that it's anchored to the back, so critters can't get stuck behind there, especially your small snakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the small snakes can fit in a lot of places.
Absolutely.
What plants are appropriate for my enclosure?
So plants, picking a plants for your enclosure. I'm pretty sure I've definitely written an article for the BioDude on this subject. So I'm better at writing than I am talking, so I definitely recommend checking that out first. The first thing you want to determine when choosing plants is, okay, what type of environment are you going for? Not just like reptiles, plants have specific environmental needs. So you don't want to use a tropical plant for a desert setup, and you don't want to use a desert plant for a tropical setup, or else they're going to die pretty fast. They're not going to thrive. Unfortunately, when it comes to keeping live plants, it's kind of like having a second pet in the same enclosure. You have to give them a lot of care and attention, and particularly in the setup, so that you know you can meet their needs. Yep.
And what's really important is you're not always picking the plants out for the enclosure. You are picking your plants out for your inhabitants. Not for you, not for your enclosure, for your snake, for your lizard, for your frog, whatever. And one of the biggest things that I like to look at is, A, can this plant handle the weight of my critter? If my snake lays on top of it, is it going to die? If it doesn't, then great. Does it work in the temperature and humidity gradients that snake requires? That's 2 check marks. Then the other check mark is, do you like that plant? You hit all 3. That's a really good deciding factor. But understanding the plants in the way of not only their requirements that Mariah was saying, but understanding what they can handle as far as, I don't want to say neglect, but neglect in the way of just constantly getting messed with. Their root systems are going to get disturbed, because if you have fossorial reptiles or burrowing reptiles that like to go above and under. If you have a pothos plant that's going to get uprooted, we know that pothos can handle that. But if you have something that has a much more of an intricate root system that's more delicate, like a Selaginella, that's when we're going to say no, that isn't going to work. So another really good way to look at that is look at your animal's natural habitat. Go on Google Earth, and take a look at whatever pictures that you can find, and see, okay, there's a lot of big broad-leaved plants. I'm setting up for a red-eye tree frog. I noticed that a lot of the plants in their habitat are big leaves. They're big leaves, they're broad leaves, they're vining leaves, and there's a lot of water everywhere, and they can handle the wetness. So for me, that's like the biggest thing that I look at. And can this plant be eaten? And if this plant is eaten, will it make my animal sick? There are lots of plants with oxalates in them, like pothos and Schefflera. And while there are some specialized reptiles, like prehensile tail skinks from the Solomon Islands, that will eat Scheffleras and eat pothos because they need those specific crystals in their diet, there are other reptiles that if they would eat that, it could potentially make them not feel so good.
Best case scenario, you're going to look for instances of, has a reptile been successfully kept with this plant, even despite taking a bite out of it? Has it survived the encounter? Because usually for carnivores and insectivores, you're looking at a very occasional accidental bite of the plant. But when it comes to herbivores and omnivores, you need to be a lot more careful with the plants that you use, because they're likely to eat them down to a stub. So you need to make sure that the plants are edible. The tortoise table database is one of my favorite references for determining whether or not a plant is safe to use in an enclosure where it is likely to get nibbled on. Also, on that note, with insectivores, you need to be careful about the plants you use still, because the insects might eat the plants. So say you have a bioactive setup, you have a cleanup crew that is known to nibble a little bit on the plants. Say
and you
you've
put
got
a
roaches.
Euphorbia plant in there. Those are like super toxic.
And there you go. And then you could accidentally kill your reptile because it ate an insect that ate a poisonous plant. So there's a chain
it
reaction
happens,
there.
yes, and it happens. And again, that all is understanding with what you're putting into your tank and understanding your animal's needs and, you know, the ins and outs of maintaining all aspects of the care of your animal with all that stuff.
Josh, you mentioned earlier going to Google Earth, going to iNaturalist, looking at the types of plants in the animal's natural environment.
Yep.
You can even take that a step further, and you can look at accounts of what plants are found in the animal's natural habitat, whether in papers, are usually the kinds that you're going to see where you're going to see specific species names of the plants found in their habitat. And then you can see if you can't find those actual plants available for you to plant in your own enclosure. There's a whole trend right now of planting I think it's called a biotope enclosure, where you're actually only using materials and plants that are naturally found in the animal's habitat. You are recreating a piece of its natural environment in your home. It's really ultimate.
That is pretty ultimate.
But it's awesome.
One day I hope to have a Texas exhibit with just Texas plants, Texas dirt, and some Texas anoles and Texas gray tree frogs and other critters that just show up and have a big old Texas flag right in the back of it. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I digress. I'm so sorry.
Oh, we cream.
He's doing great. Basically, yeah, you need to have plants. And the reason we say that is because your plant roots in your enclosure, with you having a contained ecosystem, it is very hard to get fresh things in and fresh things out. So you're relying on specifically your bacterial and fungal processes to form symbiotic relationships with those roots to help exchange sugars for other important aspects of your soil health. You know, with your endo and ecto mycorrhizae and those other things, they work directly with your plant system. So think about it this way. As your plant grows, the root system becomes more extensive. A more extensive root system aerates out your soil more effectively. A more aerated soil is better for reinforcing your positive bacteria and other things like that that you want for a long-lasting terrarium. Whereas if you don't have any plants in there, you are solely relying on your cleanup crew. And when you are solely relying on cleanup crew, you are going to lose essential minerals pretty quickly. And then that's when you have to start supplementing your soil. So I do make a product called BioVive that does kind of help with people that don't want to use plants. But honestly, the easy answer to that question is no. I don't recommend calling it bioactive. I'd rather see you go the naturalistic route and then just do substrate changes when needed.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, you know, bioactive is just not practical because you can't keep plants alive in the enclosure for whatever reason.
Yep.
It might be too dry. That's one difficulty with Uromastix enclosures. It's very difficult to create a functional bioactive Uromastix enclosure because of the low humidity and the high heat as well. That bakes most plants. Same for really heavy species. So larger snakes, larger lizards, even a blue-tongued skink, it's hard to keep a plant alive. Right now, I'm just really happy I got some Mexican feathergrass to start thriving in my northern blue-tongued skink enclosure.
That's awesome.
Took a long time to figure out.
We've been doing, Dan's enclosure has been doing pretty well. We just, the biggest thing with him is he just likes to just randomly destroy stuff.
I mean, destruction of plants is kind of a form of enrichment, so.
Oh, honestly, when people come in with their beardies and, you know, they're omnivores, I tell them the plants that you put in, expect them to get destroyed.
You're going to have to replace them.
The expectation is that they're there for them to eat and destroy. They're not there for you to make your tank look pretty. Even though it's nice, you know, to have, like, you know, you can have some, like, harder things that, you know, some, like, you know, some thick agaves with, like, some of the later spikes that you can put in there that they aren't strong enough to rip off of. You know, I've seen a lot of success with that, but yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta accept the plant's gonna die.
Yeah, yep. But the biggest thing with plants is it improves air quality, it helps with humidity, and those symbiotic relationships with your essential microbiological processes are the foundation of any successful bioactive ecosystem.
Why is tap water unsafe?
Ooh, unsafe's a pretty...
Unsafe's a strong word.
Extreme word. Just not the best option is the better way to put that. So, Mariah, go ahead. I'll let you lead this one off. It
really depends, I guess, on your tap water to begin with. If... Oh, we have dog and snakes. Unsafe is a really strong word.
Yeah.
It's more like suboptimal. So, and it really depends on where you live and the tap water in your area, as well as whether your water is softened. So if your water is softened, it's probably best not to use that for drinking water or even for watering plants, just because it's replacing the calcium ions in the water with sodium ions, and that's not really great for either small animals or plants to begin with. Otherwise, I mean, it's not the worst thing to use tap water. I have really hard water in my area, so what happens is I get a lot of calcium deposits and calcium buildup in the soil, which I have to compensate for. But ultimately, it's better if you can to use spring water or even distilled water. Distilled water is one of the best things you can use for plants specifically. So if you have a bioactive setup, distilled water might be the way to go. And from my research, I am inclined to say it should be safe to allow arboreal species to drink or lap up droplets of distilled water as long as they're being supplemented appropriately.
I was going to say, yeah, the distilled's okay. It's just you got to make sure you're supplementing those additional missing things that are missing, especially with frogs. Don't want to use distilled water with amphibians. You got to make sure that you give those minerals and things back in there. That and tap water leaves residue on your glass a lot faster. So if you're not down to deal with hard water stains and calcium deposits on your water, on your glass, then tap water may not be the best option for you.
In some of your videos, there's not a water dish. Do all reptiles and amphibians need a water dish?
What video did I not put a water dish in the thing?
It sounds like they probably just didn't see the water dish because...
Never, ever, ever do you not want to have a water bowl in there. If somebody could point out to me what video that is, so that way I can go in the description and change that. You guys, under no circumstances should there never be a clean source of water for your pet reptiles.
Arboreal species get one of those magnetic ledges, fill a cup with water, put it there. Desert species, even my Uromastix has a water bowl, which gets filled at least twice a week to make sure that it has access to water when it needs it. So it's one of the standards of welfare for animals in captivity is making sure that they always have a source of clean, fresh water available for drinking.
All the time.
So there is no excuse to not be providing water on a regular basis for a reptile. Sometimes the water needs change. Some need a lot more water than others, and that's something to pay attention to, definitely. But water is a cornerstone of life. It must always be available.
Should heating pads be used at the bottom or the back of the enclosure?
So for me, the initial, do you guys remember I did my leopard gecko video like 5 years ago? Those tanks didn't have a lip at the bottom. And the heat mat manufacturer said you cannot put that at the bottom of a tank if it doesn't have the lip because you can't pinch the cord. So that's what I was putting at the bottom on the side, and I was sloping my substrate up in condition of using other like rocks and things like that to help push that through. That worked for me, but I don't know if that works for everybody. Mariah, how do you feel about that?
I don't like putting heat mats on the side of enclosures. They're not very effective at warming air. I use it for actually my dubia colony. That way to just provide a small temperature gradient because it's like an 8-gallon tank. I don't have a lot of dubias to begin with, so
what if the substrate is going all the way up to the top of the heat mat? So what I'm getting at is that they put the heat mat right. You never put heat mat on with water on the other side.
Nope.
But just pretend this is filled with substrate. The heat mat is here, and the substrate goes up to here, and it's on the side.
It's not going to do anything for you. Honestly, if you have a deep substrate layer, so almost any bioactive enclosure, putting a heat mat on the bottom isn't going to do squat for you. If you need to use a heat mat, say for regulating a warm hide, like I mentioned in our heating video, then I would put the heat mat, so let's see if our bull snake will let me move my hands. We're good. So take black box hide and a piece of flagstone or slate tile, one of those cheese boards, something stone, plastic box hide, stone, heat mat sandwiched in between, thermostat probe inside the hide. That's the best place to put your heat mat. You're going to create that warm hide, regulated by a thermostat. It's going to be usable in that particular location, and it's going to be, and that's just going to be overall the most effective way to use a heat mat in a naturalistic or bioactive enclosure.
Okay. Awesome. Appreciate that clarity there, because like I said, I really need to update that video. It's so long ago. My goodness.
Yeah, 5 years is a while.
Yes, it is.
How how do I select the appropriate heating and lighting for my enclosure?
I might be able to summarize it
Okay,
based on my
okay.
care guides.
Okay.
So when I'm creating a care guide and I need to decide on the best heating and lighting for the animal, the first thing I look at is what UV index they need.
Yep.
And choose an appropriate Arcadia or Zoomed bulb accordingly. So options are the shade dweller, the arboreal shade dweller, the your forest bulb, or your desert bulb usually. Take that according to the UVI, calculate the distance that it needs to be used, or better yet, if you don't have a good reference, I do have a good reference because I have friends who've given me their numbers from their measurements. Use a solar meter 6.5 to figure out the distance that you need. Most nocturnal animals are going to do better. Nocturnal animals in larger enclosures, you're looking at a shade dweller or for the lower end of the UVI, or a forest spectrum bulb for the higher end. For desert diurnal species, you're probably looking at a desert type UV bulb. So we can dial it down more or less there. And there's a lot that, we can go into this topic forever, the nuances. So that's just barely scraping the surface.
Yeah, it's really extensive because, I mean, every critter's different.
Yeah.
And honestly, every need for that. So a guy that keeps, a person that keeps a crested gecko in California is going to be completely different than a person that keeps a crested gecko in Maine.
It's true. Yeah.
It is completely different besides your UV. The heating you need, the supplemental heating you need, everything is night and day. So you need to have that good concrete understanding of where you live and how that's going to affect you heating your enclosure with the temperature and humidity requirements.
Yeah, I understand that's really intimidating.
Yep.
So usually you can go on a baseline of most people live in homes around, you can assume about 72 degrees, give or take 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And for heating, what I look for is, okay, what time of day is it active? How much heat does it need? And what is the size of the animal? That will tell me the intensity of the bulb that needs to be used when I'm installing a halogen, whether or not a heat mat would be beneficial, and then also how many bulbs am I going to need to appropriately heat the animal's entire body, or the majority of it. So that is basically the skinny on how I determine heating and lighting. Oh, and also plant lighting.
Yes.
So if it's diurnal, regardless of whether you have plants, you should have additional lighting in the enclosure. So that's going to be about 6,500 Kelvin to 7,000. And that will tell you, that will give you a good daylight spectrum of light that will be friendly to the animal's vision. It will give you additional illumination. It's nice to have in a smaller enclosure. It's an absolute necessity for appropriately illuminating a diurnal reptile in a large enclosure.
Yes,
you might even need multiple lights to mimic that brightness.
LEDs really help with that. Like a good, My Glow and Grow, Arcadias, Jungle Dawns. There's so many options out there.
Are the two, my default two I recommend for daytime LEDs because you really want that bright, good quality light. If it's good for the plants, it's going to be good for the reptile. If it's blue and red, stay far, far away.
Yeah, so obviously, My Glow and Grows, they have very minor blue and red diodes in them, but the light is still white. That is what's important. There cannot be any deviation of color in that light when
if
it
the light
comes
looks
to
purple, that's a problem.
Yeah, if it looks purple or blue or anything else, you don't want it. Good question. Good question. Initially, I was like, I don't know if I can answer that. But.
Where are the best places to put the thermometer/humidity probe?
Okay. Honestly, for that, you can put it on anywhere. So I'll usually if I want to know what my reptile's basking spot is, I will find their favorite spot that they like to sit. And then from there, I'll put the probe right there. And then I'll get a reading. And then I'll go to the cool end of the enclosure. Where does my dude like to chill in the cool end? I'll put the probe right there. So I like to put it in the areas my animal travels, not in areas that my animal doesn't touch. So if you have a terrestrial lizard, I'm not going to be putting the temperature probe at the top right corner of the tank. Because that's not, it can give you, guess what the ambient is, but heat rises. Yeah. So, we're going to want a little bit more of an in-depth approach with that. And again, there's other options too. There's temp guns. Temp guns are amazing. And then, there's also, measuring humidity. I like to make sure that the probe doesn't get wet. To make sure that it's in an area where it's just getting the air and not like being dipped in water or anything like that. Because then that can give you a false high reading.
Yeah, for me, you want to kind of, what I factor in is placing the probe where the animal is likely to go. Oh, you don't like it when I move my hands, do you? I am a scary bird. This is hard not gesticulating. So what I do for basking temperature is if I want a reading on the basking air temperature, I will place the probe more or less on or near the surface, directly underneath the heat lamp. And for getting a reading of the cool side temperature, oh, we are noisy, we want to put the probe on the cool side of the enclosure near the substrate. In our boreal enclosures, it's not going to be so much on the substrate as it's going to be like in a shaded area of the enclosure away from the heat source. I will use a probe usually when I'm looking for air temperature in the basking spot. I will use a temp gun when I'm looking for surface temperature in the basking area. You're going to get more or less the same reading, air temperature and surface temperature on the cool end, but when there's a heat source involved, you are going to get different readings in the basking area. So if you're looking for basking surface temperature specifically, you're going to get a better reading from the temp gun. Do be mindful, those readings change depending on the surface, or the type of basking surface that you're using, say wood versus plastic versus stone, because each of those absorb heat and reflect it differently. As for humidity, I like to put the probe in the middle of the enclosure, so neither on the warm end or the cool end, because humidity levels or humidity readings are affected by local temperature. So I get a general good idea of average when it's in the middle, when it's not in the hot area, it's not in the cool area. That gives me a good idea of average, but if you're looking for the area of highest humidity in the enclosure, you want to put it in the humid hide. It's going to give you an idea of your maximum. And your minimum you can measure on the warm area, because the higher the temperature, the lower the relative humidity.
Are there lighting and heating products that won't take a big hit to my electric bill?
Yes and no.
I don't.
It's not something you should really
go cheap on.
Yeah.
It's also, yeah, you can get a cheaper brand. Everybody knows what reptile brands are cheaper than others. But lighting is your most important aspect of your husbandry. If you're gonna, and obviously your tank sizes too. I guess you can go with like cheaper brands if you want, and you can get the base, but your goal should always be to get the good stuff.
There are more efficient ways to light and heat your reptiles. For example, you get better heat output from a halogen than you will from a standard incandescent. And you will also get more light per unit, in theory, from an LED grow bulb than you will from
like a T5.
From a T5HO. Yep. But sometimes it's just not a good idea to go the eco-friendly route. Heat is watts, or rather watts are heat. And so the higher the wattage, the higher the heat output. So you can be more efficient about it by opting for a halogen rather than a standard incandescent. But say you want to save electricity, be eco-friendly with a UVB bulb, so you're tempted to get a UVB LED rather than a T5HO, not a good idea. Right now, LED technology is not in a place where we can safely use it for providing UVA and UVB to our reptiles. So until you hear the okay from experts, definitely stay away from those. At the end of the day, if you're worried about your electric bill going up $20 or so per month because you got a new reptile, if that's your concern, a reptile might not be the best option for you. If you're coming at it from an eco-conscious standpoint, that's definitely understandable. There are ways, but at the end of the day, it's adding more devices and using more electricity in your home. So again, you're going to have to make that judgment call.
Yeah.
How old does my animal need to be before introducing them to a bioactive setup?
It depends on the animal.
Yeah. So bearded dragons, I introduced Hercules when he was 45 days old, but I also really know what I'm doing. And I made sure that he ate from a cup. And I made sure that I was really careful. I usually tell people when they're like 90 days old for young lizards. And then for snakes, I like them to have at least 2 sheds and eating consistently every single week before they go in there. The most important thing is that you know that your animal's healthy. Mariah, why can't we put an animal with mites or an animal that isn't, let's say we just bought a wild-caught Cuban nightingale at a reptile show. Why can't I take it home right away and put it in a bioactive setup?
All right, because it's a waste of a bioactive setup. You are probably going to have to throw it all out. You need to parasite check it. You need to, because those parasites can become endemic inside the enclosure. And when you have a bioactive, the only way to get rid of things like that is to completely throw it out and start fresh. It's a massive waste of money. It's hugely frustrating if you've had something established. Mites, it's the same thing. You have a mite explosion. Quarantine, quarantine, quarantine. Any new animal, whether it's from a breeder, whether it's wild caught, it doesn't matter. Quarantine first for at least a month. In some cases, it's better to quarantine for 6 months to a year, depending on the species and the diseases that it may have been exposed to, and the number of animals that are in your home that could potentially be infected. So that's huge. And even with plants, make sure they are well quarantined, that they are well disinfected. Right now I'm battling a mealybug problem in my crested gecko bio that I've been trying to get going for the last several months, and I just lost a fiddle leaf fig to it. I'm on the losing end of this battle, so I am definitely learning this firsthand, that you really can't be too careful with even plant quarantine.
So it's essentially what we're getting at, your animal needs to be healthy. So age is a big thing. We want to make sure we're not putting a newborn baby that hasn't eaten yet in a bio setup that could overwhelm us.
Baby reptiles are so delicate. There's a reason why so many of them, they're born in clutches of dozens. It's because a lot of them aren't going to survive their first year, whether it's just because they lost the genetic lottery or for other reasons. So you want to give yours the best chance possible. Treat it carefully while it's young. So,
you know, those are the stipulations that I normally tell my customers. It's at the end of the day, it's, you know, if you're buying from a breeder and you're buying, this is going to happen. You're going to buy a full breed, you're going to buy a whole kit, and you're going to buy the frog, and you're going to set it all up and put it in there. You know, if that's the route you're going to go, because a lot of people are going to do that regardless, you want to make sure you have an understanding with your breeder that breeder takes ethical precautions. That you know you're getting a snake that's not infested with mites, or it has mites, or came from a facility with mites. You know that your amphibians are tested for chytrid. You know that if the animal is wild caught, that it was already dewormed and treated and quarantined and seen by a vet. And even with that, you should still be quarantining, but we know people won't listen. So
true.
Biggest thing is make sure your critters are healthy. Make sure that you are getting consistent bowel movements, drinking, eating, shedding. Then yes, I'd say it's okay.
And frankly, you should not be buying from breeders who are selling the animals before they are selling baby reptiles or amphibians before they are.
And unfortunately, the people that end up succumbing to that are the people that have no clue what they're doing because they're just getting into it. And that's the ethical dilemma that our hobby has been facing for the last 25 years.
Why should I take my animal to the veterinarian if otherwise looks healthy?
Because you don't know if it's actually healthy unless you are a veterinarian or some other type of expert yourself.
Thank you, Mariah.
I am sorry. I will scream this from the rooftops. Everyone's like, well, it looks healthy. And I'm like, are you sure it's healthy? Like, really, reptiles, one, are really, really good at hiding illness. And there are a lot of illnesses that can happen that are not very visible. In snakes, excessive weight gain is hard to tell. But your vet will be tracking that if the vet is seeing them every year.
As well as there are some veterinarians, as part of a standard of care, for your female reptiles that consistently produce their own eggs even though they don't breed. It's also part of a standard to potentially get radiographs done of the musculoskeletal system to make sure that we're not contracting early stages of metabolic bone disease. There's a lot of preventative medicine that's done.
Blood panels, radiographs, ultrasounds, making sure that the organs, the muscles, the bones, everything is working healthy. And you can't see that, but your vet can. As long as you are going to an experienced reptile vet. Of course, I wouldn't trust a dog vet with seeing my reptiles unless I was really in dire straits.
And again, if you guys aren't sure, I do have my veterinary affiliates page. You guys can visit that and see all of our recommended veterinarians on Mariah's website. We also have a full page of ARAV veterinarians as well as other veterinarians that you can trust to take care of your critters.
The list of veterinarians on Reptifiles is based on glowing customer reviews from people who know what to look for in a reptile veterinarian. So
and
they're very trustworthy.
And the ones on my veterinary affiliates page are the ones that I personally scoped out or have worked with or have met at various, like when I went to Exotics Con, things like that. But again, it's important that, I want to end the question with this. I was just at Living Treasures. you know, this beautiful park couple last week in Minnesota, and they have a 68-year-old Pennsylvania. They have a 68-year-old sulcata tortoise. When I was talking to the owner, he's like, yeah, we usually take him we have a vet come out and see him about once a year, and they take his blood and do all this and that. And they do that every single year on their tortoise. But this is also a sulcata tortoise that's older than probably every single person watching this video and weighs 250 pounds. So just because, you know, whether if it's a tiny snake or a large tortoise, it's still a good standard of care because they're animals just like your cat or your dog, just the fact that they're not domesticated.
Yeah. Veterinary care is a staple component of caring for any pet.
Yep. Yeah.
There is an abundance of information online. How do I know what is okay and what is not okay for my animals?
Yeah, that's tough. It's really tough. I'm going to definitely take point on this if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm not on social media, so Mariah, have fun.
So the first thing you want to pay attention to is the animal's natural habitat. So if the instructions being given are not consistent with its natural environment, then that's your first red flag. Is, for example, if you see someone saying, oh, ball pythons only live in termite mounds for their entire lives, therefore they don't need a large enclosure, they don't need to stretch out, they sit around and do nothing all day long, 24/7, 365 days a year, it's like, no, biological evidence of their habitat is asserting to the contrary. Do they spend some time in termite mounds?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they do. Guess what? There are a lot of other species that spend time in termite mounds that we don't recommend keeping in a tiny enclosure that they can't move in. So be very careful. Make sure to get familiar with the animal's environment first.
Yep.
With its habitat, with its ecological niche, and work appropriately. Then check the equipment that's being used, and pay attention to the publication date as well on the information if you can find it. Sometimes information that has been published 20 years ago can still be good. But
Sometimes.
The equipment recommendations can be tricky. Temperature, humidity recommendations, those are more likely to hold steady than the exact equipment that's being used. Try to use the stuff that's most up to date, but has also been proven reliable. So, like I said before, just because LED UVB is new does not necessarily mean that it's
right.
better than a T5HO.
Yep. I'm gonna agree with you with that. So, you know, with me, when it comes to buying from individuals, I'll do my own due diligence online. And if that breeder doesn't have anything, I'll try to look at their website. And you know, if I can't get anything from that, I look at the animal. If it's a snake, I'll look under its eyes. I'll look under its chin to make sure we don't have any mites. I'll look and make sure that we're not obese or underweight. Make sure we have good muscle tone, and make sure they can give me a schedule. How often is this snake eating? When was the last time the snake shed? How often is this snake going to the bathroom?
Yeah, that's a good point too. Is like, okay, what if you don't know what the animal is supposed to look like? If you have only seen bearded dragons in captivity, how are you supposed to know what they're actually supposed to look like? Well, go look for pictures on Flickr, on iNaturalist of ones in their natural environment. Look at those pictures for examples of body condition. Now, granted, the ones in the wild tend to be a bit skinnier than we would like them to be in captivity. But if your reptile is twice the size of its wild counterpart, there's a good chance that its body condition is not good.
Yeah. And again, that all comes down with doing your due diligence as an owner and understanding what you're actually keeping.
Yeah. Or your mastics, they're supposed to look chubby, but a lot of people think they're supposed to look skinny because skinny is good, right? Generally, yes, but your mastics have gigantic guts that they need for digestion.
It's to break down all the seeds and all that other stuff that they eat.
And when they look skinny, it's probably because they're really dehydrated.
Yep, because most of them are imports.
Yeah, buy from breeders, guys. Buy not just from any breeder, buy from a good, established, reputable breeder who knows what they're doing. Yep. Shop around, compare notes.
Yep.
If you could go back and give yourself any advice on keeping reptiles and amphibians, is there something you wish you would have known sooner?
Yeah, I don't mind answering.
I can answer that one. That's a good one.
Ugh. Let's open the box of shame.
Let's open the box of shame. That's right. So if I could go back and learn something about reptiles that I wish I would have known before doing it, you go first. I have a few.
I would tell myself that reptiles aren't animals that you can neglect just because they're low maintenance. And also, minimalistic is not okay. That they are not pets that you can put in an empty box. All of the portrayals that you've seen in movies and media and whatever else are probably telling you the wrong thing about what it's like to keep a pet reptile.
Yeah.
You're more likely to get a better idea from looking at their natural environment, from looking at zoos. Look at the best sources, not just, you know, gaining general impressions. There was once upon a time when I didn't actually read that much. I worked on a lot of preconceptions about what it would like to keep be like to keep a reptile, or I would only trust what a friend told me, and I didn't do much research beyond that. And I made a lot of mistakes that way, as you can imagine.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I wish I could go back and be like, hey, speaking from hard-won experience, you're making a lot of these mistakes and causing animals to suffer.
Yeah.
Did I do it on purpose? No.
No.
But I wish I could go back and fix those mistakes.
I used a lot of products that I didn't. So you guys know I'm a businessman, so I look at this as kind of as a businessman as well. I used a lot of products and recommended products when I was younger that I later learned were just god awful.
Yep, that happens.
And I'm not talking about Repticarpet or things. I'm talking like just some of the other really majorly still available commercial products that kill lots of critters every year. And it's just like, to me, I learned really quick that the reptile industry is a lot like the dog food industry without the AAFCO statement. Yeah. When you look at dog food, the only thing that tells you about what's actually in the bag is the AAFCO statement. So these marketers can put whatever they want on the bag of dog food without any legal repercussions. They can say it's large breed adult, but it's puppy food in the bag. Unless you look at the AAFCO statement and if it says it's for puppies or all life stages. Reptiles, we don't even get that luxury. Yeah. People can straight tell us that this is what it does and this is what it is, but in actuality, it doesn't do any of those things.
Yeah, or it does, but
it does it so inefficiently. Like some of those coil UVB bulbs that we tested in that last video, and some of the other majorly commercial substrates that are so darn acidic for fossorial species. I can go all day, but that's something that I would tell myself is I was part of the problem when I was a lot younger. It took me a long time to really learn how a lot of this stuff works with a lot of trial and error.
Here's my embarrassing confession. I once had a Dumerol's boa. Man, I did a lot of things wrong with that snake. So we'll just start with that. But I used not only aspen substrate in an undersized tub to house this animal, but I also used a used heat mat for heating that was not regulated by a thermostat. I had no idea what temperatures it was getting to.
Oh, no.
And when I finally sold the snake because he wasn't working out for reasons that were probably my fault, definitely my fault, I found that the desk underneath the enclosure where the heat mat had been was completely scorched. The wood was a different color and smelled different. It was a major fire hazard. It warped the plastic on the top. It was so dangerous, and it was in my own home.
Dude, you're lucky your house didn't burn down.
I am so lucky that the snake never got burnt, that my house never burned down. Guardian Angel was looking after me because that was a stupid, stupid thing to do.
Okay. Well, I really hope you guys enjoyed our little Q&A segment here of tips and tricks. I'm Josh Halter, owner and founder of The BioDude.
I'm Mariah Healey of reptiles.com.
I really appreciate y'all's following. Really appreciate everybody's support. Feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. The dude abides.
And the snake is on the move.